Imagine a military historian's strangest nightmare. May 5th, 1945. Only hours remain until the end of World War II in Europe. Adolf Hitler has already turned to ash in his bunker. Berlin is drowning in blood. Across Germany, millions of soldiers are throwing down their weapons. But here, in the snow-capped Austrian Alps, time has seemingly frozen to play out one last, insane act of this tragedy. On the narrow wall of the medieval Castle Itter, pressed against the cold stone, stand men who, just yesterday, would have killed each other on sight. An American captain with a weathered face and a cigar between his teeth. A major of the German Wehrmacht with an iron cross around his neck. And a French politician in a tailored suit, clumsily but fiercely clutching a captured submachine gun. And there, down below, in the thick green of the forest, hundreds of eyes are watching them. The elite of the Waffen-SS, fanatics for whom the war will not end until the last traitor has been wiped from the face of the earth. This is the story of how the rules of reality were torn to shreds. The strangest battle of the war, where American steel and German powder united to protect the men who once ruled France. This is no legend. This is the battle for Castle Itter. Castle Itter, majestically rising from a hilltop in the Brixental Valley, had served for centuries as a symbol of power. But in 1943, the Nazis turned this architectural gem into something sinister. Itter became a golden cage, a subcamp of Dachau reserved exclusively for the most important prisoners of the Third Reich. Here languished those Hitler held as living pawns. Among them were Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, two former prime ministers of France. There were generals Maxime Weygand and Maurice Gamelin, commanders of the French army, and even Marie-Agnès de Gaulle, the older sister of Charles de Gaulle. Every room in this castle was soaked in political intrigue, old grudges, and a freezing fear of the future. The prisoners lived in a strange surrealism. They were served fine meals and allowed to read, but SS machine guns watched them from the walls. They were isolated from a world on fire, and the only thing they knew for certain, if the Reich falls, they must not leave these gates alive. By May 1945, Castle Itter resembled a powder keg. The prison commander, SS Hauptsturmführer Sebastian Wimmer, saw the end coming. On May 4th, he stripped off his insignia and fled into the forest with his guards. The French politicians suddenly found the castle empty, but their freedom was an illusion. Roaming the thick Tyrolean woods were wandering SS units, the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. To these men, anyone not in their ranks was an enemy. The French were easy prey. One appearance of the SS at the gates would mean the immediate execution of every valuable witness. 5 miles away, in the small town of Wurgl, sat Major Josef Gangl. He was a professional soldier, a veteran of the Eastern Front, a man who had seen enough death to know this war was lost and criminal. Gangl wasn't a hero from a fairy tale. He was a man who wanted to save his soldiers and the local civilians from a senseless massacre. Gangl had effectively joined the Austrian resistance. When a Czech cook from the castle managed to slip past SS patrols on a bicycle to beg for help, Gangl knew this was his chance. But his force was too small. He needed an ally, someone with armor and big guns. At that moment, the scouts of the 12th Armored Division were moving through the valley. Captain John Jack Lee, a classic American officer. He liked his drink, he liked a tough word, and he hated Nazis. When a German car with a white flag drove toward his positions, Lee didn't pull the trigger. He stepped out to meet it. The scene was straight out of a movie. 2 officers standing on a sun-drenched road, one in a rumpled American uniform, the other in the field gray of the Wehrmacht. Gangl explained the situation in broken English. The castle is full of French leaders. The SS are preparing a purge. We need help. Jack Lee didn't bother with HQ. He knew the bureaucrats would forbid this gamble. He handpicked 8 volunteers, 2 tanks, and told Gangl to ride with him. But the bridge over the River Inn was too weak for heavy armor. Lee left 1 tank behind and moved forward in his favorite Sherman, Besotten Jenny. In the trucks behind him rode Gangl's German soldiers. Yesterday's mortal enemies were now sitting shoulder to shoulder, checking their magazines. The road to Castle Itter was like walking through a minefield. When Besotten Jenny screeched into the castle gates, the French prisoners poured into the courtyard. They expected a liberating army. Instead, they saw 1 tank, 7 Americans, and a handful of Germans they were used to hating. Edouard Daladier asked with indignation, "Is this all?" Captain Lee, without taking the cigar out of his mouth, replied, "It's all you've got, sir. I suggest you start digging." Lee quickly assessed the situation. He had fewer than 30 men to hold a fortress. He placed the Americans at key points and distributed Gang's Germans along the perimeter. The hardest part was convincing the French not to interfere. The generals began arguing over tactics. The politicians began bringing up old failures. Lee shouted them down, forcing them into the basement, but he knew these were not the kind of men to sit quietly. The night of May 5th was unnervingly quiet. Gang and Lee sat on the castle wall, passing a flask of whiskey back and forth. They barely spoke. There was no need. Both understood the morning would be bloody. At dawn, the silence was shattered by a single sniper shot. A bullet chipped the stone just above Jack Lee's head. That was the signal. From the forest, on 3 sides, the SS came. They didn't scream Heil Hitler. They moved in silence, with the hollow resolve of professional executioners. The first shell from a German 88mm gun hidden in the woods roared over the castle and exploded in the upper rooms where the French ministers had been eating breakfast just 30 minutes before. The thunder of the first explosion still echoed through the halls when a true rain of steel descended upon Itter. This wasn't random fire. The SS soldiers from the Gotz von Berlichen division attacked methodically, professionally, and without mercy. They used tactics honed by years of war, suppressing fire from heavy MG-42 machine guns, while infantry squads moved toward the walls in short, jagged bursts. Captain Jack Lee stood in the inner courtyard, shouting over the whistle of bullets. His tank, Besotten Jenny, stuck in the gates, snarled back. The .50 caliber machine guns spat out shells, turning the space in front of the castle into a dead zone. Lee knew the tank was their greatest hope and their biggest target. In the forest, German anti-tank crews were already lining up their 88mm gun on the motionless Sherman. The second shell sliced through the air with a signature howl. The hit was precise. The steel bolt slammed into the side of the tank, and Jenny shuddered. Flames erupted inside as the remaining ammunition detonated. The crew scrambled out just moments before the machine turned into a towering torch. Now, the castle was left without its big gun. The defenders had nothing but small arms and the ancient stones of a medieval fortress. At that moment, something happened that shattered the laws of war. The French prisoners, whom Jack Lee had tried to lock in the basement, refused to obey. Paul Renault, a former prime minister, now over 70 years old, ran onto the wall with a submachine gun in his hands. Edouard Daladier followed him. Generals Weygand and Gamelin, men who had hated each other for years over the fall of France in 1940, now stood shoulder to shoulder, loading magazines for American machine gunners. It was a sight of bitter irony. The men whose politics had led France to ruin were now personally defending their lives alongside the soldiers of an army they had once considered hostile. Major Josef Gangl darted between the Americans and his own Germans, correcting their fire. He could see the noose tightening. The SS were only 100 yards from the walls, preparing Panzerfausts to blow the main gates. Gangl saw a sniper in the forest, taking aim at Paul Renaud, who had stepped too far out from behind a stone tooth of the wall. Gangl didn't think about politics, or his oath, or the fact that he was fighting his own countrymen. He didn't see a prime minister. He saw a man whom he had promised to protect. The major lunged forward, tackling the Frenchman to the ground to shield him. In that same second, the sniper's bullet ended Josef Gangl's life. A German officer fell dead, saving a French politician, under the command of an American captain. This was the peak of the battle's absurdity and its nobility. Gangl died only days before the end of the war, a war he had survived from the very beginning to the very end. With Gangl gone, the situation became desperate. Ammunition was running dry. Jack Lee ordered everyone to retreat into the donjon, the main tower. It was their last line of defense. The SS had already breached the outer courtyard, their screams audible through the crackle of the fire. Lee looked at his empty magazines and realized soon it would come down to knives and hand-to-hand combat. In this critical moment, Jean Bouratra, the tennis star and Wimbledon champion, approached Captain Lee. He was an athlete, a man of incredible endurance. Bouratra proposed an insane plan. He would jump the wall, run through the forest, and try to find the main American column. Lee looked at him like he was a madman, but there was no choice. Bouratra vaulted over the parapet, rolled down the slope under a hail of bullets, and vanished into the green. The defenders of Itter waited in silence. An hour passed. Then another. The SS began their assault on the tower using ladders and hooks. Jack Lee stood at the door with his pistol, ready to sell his life as dearly as possible. He imagined how it would end. The castle would become a mass grave for everyone, Americans, Germans, and French alike. But then the air shook. It wasn't an SS gun. It was the roar of dozens of heavy engines and the piercing, unmistakable sound of American sirens. Like the cavalry in an old western, the column of the 142nd Infantry Regiment came screaming out of the valley. Sherman tanks hammered onto the plaza, swinging their turrets. Jean Bouratra had made it. Seeing the white stars on the tanks, the SS fanatics, who just a minute ago were masters of the field, fell into a panic. Heavy machine gun fire put a final, brutal stop to the engagement. When the dust settled, the courtyard of Castle Itter presented an unbelievable scene. American infantrymen storming the fortress froze in their tracks. There stood Jack Lee, blackened by soot and blood, with an empty holster. Beside him stood a group of Wehrmacht soldiers who snapped their rifles up in a salute to their liberators. And from the tower, French celebrities emerged, dusting off their suits and straightening their ties. One American sergeant later recalled, "We didn't know who to shoot. We had Germans inside the fortress, Germans outside the fortress, Frenchmen with submachine guns, and our own crazy Captain Lee, who looked like he'd taken the castle from all of Germany by himself." The battle for Castle Itter was over. 5 days later, Nazi Germany officially surrendered. Captain Jack Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Major Josef Gangl was named a national hero of Austria. Today, in the town of Wurgl, a street bears his name, a permanent reminder that even in an ocean of hate, you can find an island of humanity. This battle remains in history as a strange anecdote, a curiosity, but it holds a deep meaning. Castle Itter was where the war stopped being a clash of ideologies and became a clash of people. On those ancient walls, old grudges and flags lost their value. What remained was a simple truth. When the darkness becomes too thick, even yesterday's enemies find the strength to stand shoulder to shoulder. The shadow of the giant no longer scares them. It serves as a reminder of the price of peace in the age of industrial gods. A nation that once believed in the magic of the past was rebuilt by the reality of the future.